Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's one-hour webinar entitled The Omnibus Update. There's no stop the clock on sustainability. My name is Johnny Meehan. I'm Head of Sustainability Consulting at Forvis Mazars in Ireland, and my job today is to introduce the topics and moderate the discussion. So what we have here today is a three-part structure. We have part one, which is about the panel. Introductions to a very good panel with a very broad range of experience for you. I'm going to skip through after that through a series of slides about what brought us up to today. And then in part two, there's going to be a one-to-one viewpoints contributed by the panel about where they are now with the CSRD and the Omnibus, giving us somewhat of a personal and professional view as they have very different backgrounds. And part three is about where we're going, our compass points, which is more, I hope, an interactive session, a discussion between us all, a conversation, as I like to call it. And this is the part I'm looking to the most, where we've allocated the most time, because I don't know where this is going to go. So some other important things I'd like to say at this moment about the structure and the reasons why we're having this webinar. So we're running this webinar today, which is 1 month on from the European Commission's announcement of February the 26th on the proposal for the EU Omnibus. Now, we didn't rush it. We took our time to process it because there's a lot to it. We deliberately borrowed the term stop the clock from it for the title of this webinar because there were two sides to this term. The first side is that it's the name of the upcoming proposal from the European Commission, which is subject to a vote in the European Parliament next week on April 1st. And this proposal applies to the CSRD and to disclosures, or what we would call reporting. But given the urgency of the three real emergencies that we have on climate, biodiversity and pollution, there is no stop the clock on sustainability itself. These are high stakes risks. And by not following through on sustainability work, it means that you're just adding to uncertainty in an era where there's great geopolitical uncertainty and so much up in the air. So for CFOs in particular, who became embroiled in the CSRD work, and for other business leaders, what we're trying to give you is an anchor of certainty, as I call it. And there's a bit of a maritime theme through this webinar, particularly when we get to the end. So we intend to help you with your questions that you've been asking us, and also return to the fundamentals of sustainability, which are still sound and demand our attention. So what we're going to cover today is that we're going to have a recap on the CSRD and other regulations around it. We're going to jump into the EU Omnibus proposal and discuss simplification of disclosures. We're going to speak to interesting things that we've heard in the past month in our work and in conversations with clients. And we're going to talk about pivot points for you to consider, going from what has been highly technical work on reporting to making real impact in the world, which is the business of sustainability, and going from what I would call a compliance mindset to a performance mindset. So this webinar is different because it's not a technical webinar loaded with acronyms, so beloved of sustainability practitioners. There's been nearly a month so far of others restating the Omnibus proposal. We did produce a technical guidance document, which we can link to with the FAQs following this webinar. The purpose of the webinar is to guide you in the right direction, helping you with those compass points, which is why there are other independent voices to our own in Forvis Mazars. So hopefully there are some zingers that come out in the conversation today, which are quotable. Now, please use the Q&A function and we'll see if we can get to the questions that you submit before the end, or else we will follow up in the FAQ. So now moving on to the panel that we have for you today. As I said, a range of independent voices coming from very different backgrounds with a huge amount of expertise and depth of experience. I'm going to introduce myself first, as I'm liable probably to forget myself at the end. I'm Johnny. I'm 20 years working in what we call a field of sustainability. More than 25 years of a career overall, working in strategy, in supply chains and commodities, which was my gateway into sustainability work. I started out in operations in Intel and Trecom, moved into senior positions in Cadbury, Schweppes and Kellogg's, and then entered the world of consulting in the wake of the Paris Climate Accord in 2015. My share with you is that my very first sustainability project 20 years ago in 2005 was working on climate risks in the chocolate supply chain on cacao. And for those working in confectionery, you will know that this is one of the major climate stories of this year, along with coffee. So for the panel, which I highly commend to you, by the way, so do check them out and connect on LinkedIn and follow their work. I'm going to start by a short introduction to Dr. Maximilian Schormair, who's a leading scholar in business ethics and corporate sustainability. He's an assistant professor in business ethics at Trinity College Dublin in the business school. And Max holds doctoral degrees in business ethics and business administration from the University of Hamburg, which is one of Germany's top research institutions. He regularly presents at international conferences and collaborates with industry practitioners such as myself, with NGOs and with policymakers to bridge the gap between academic insights and real-world applications. He's the director of the MSc in Responsible Business and Sustainability at Trinity, as well as for the PG Certificate in Sustainable Development. So apply today to Trinity College. Now, and hi Max, thank you for joining. For Mark McKenzie, he is a senior corporate communications professional, a researcher and a writer specializing in sustainability. He consults independently through his business, Mark McKenzie Online, after almost 14 years with KPMG, where he led the firm's global Centre of Excellence for Sustainability and Climate Change, and served as Global Director of Sustainability Marketing, Communications and Thought Leadership. Mark previously led PR at the UK's Carbon Trust. He holds a Master's in Sustainability Leadership with distinction from the University of Cambridge. Hi, Mark. Now, Aoife Gillen is Principal Sustainability Consultant at DNV EnviroGuide. Among all our numerous licenses and certifications, Aoife is a Chartered Environmental Health Practitioner and a Certified Energy Manager under the Association of Energy Engineers. Aoife has a background in environmental health with an MSc from the University of Birmingham, a BSc in environmental science, and over 14 years of experience in the field of environmental sustainability. Aoife's achievements include co-authoring annual progress reports for the Low Carbon Pledge, which is an instrument recommended in Ireland's Climate Action Plan. And at this point, I should also say kudos to the team for doing that work at Business in the Community Ireland, celebrating their 25-year anniversary this year. Hi, Aoife. Now, Liam McKenna has over 25 years experience developing and leading strategies from change management, large technology and process projects, to staff and organisation design, and more recently in sustainability reporting. Now, these programs have typically been driven by mandated change in regulated industries, and also for cost reduction and performance improvement reasons. Now, Liam joined the Forvis Mazars Global Sustainability Leadership Group in 2019, and he's the lead partner for CSRD projects for organisations across a range of sectors, providing assurance on carbon reporting and supports organisations in calculating their carbon emissions. Hi, Liam. I'll conclude the introductions by saying all of us as a community of practitioners, we've been doing work long before CSRD came into being, so you're in good hands. So in order to set the scene, I'm going to skip through 3 slides at a very high level to bring us up to today. It's really the story over the past decade in particular of how we got here. So I'm going to start by talking about a recap on the Green Deal. Okay, so this approach under the Green Deal was promoted by the European Commission in 2020. There are 2 aspects to it. First, acknowledging high stakes risks, a phrase I'll use a lot today, which are the existential threats to Europe, a continent heating at twice as fast as other continents around the world, with spillover effects nearby from climate devastated regions, such as what was once called the Fertile Crescent of Syria and Iraq. Second, there is a mitigation of risks approach by dropping an anchor of certainty, another phrase I will use a lot today, with the Green Deal, which is financing the transition to a green economy, which is to make it more resilient and using sustainability, interestingly enough, as the lever for competitiveness after a decade or more of stagnation and low GDP growth in the wake of the financial crash. Now, the opportunity at the time of the Green Deal was to make the EU a global leader for sustainability, to set the scene for others, to lead by example. And interestingly, this month, while the US stock market stagnated, or tanked is probably a better way of putting it, the EU's rebounded on news of the debt brake being lifted for climate and defence spending. Both are seen as interconnected security issues for the EU. Now, to align investment to the right things, a taxonomy was needed, and standardization of sustainability reporting too, using what worked for financial reporting for non-financial reporting. So as sustainability is really about impact in how businesses impact on the world, given that analysis shows that only 100 corporations have been responsible for more than 70% of emissions, a big piece was missing in the old approach, which would have been called ESG, which was really about how a changing world impacts on a business, the outside in, which was really about risks and opportunities. Therefore, the European Commission proposed, with guidance from the EFRAG, an approach which would have a double materiality aspect, which was the old single materiality of risks and ops plus impact, along with an approach under due diligence, which fell under an accompanying directive called the CSRD, and the need for limited assurance, moving to reasonable assurance in time, so that financials and non-financials would be bridged and integrated as one. So, last autumn, the story changes. The Draghi report emphasised competitiveness, or the competitiveness gap in the EU, in a comparative analysis somewhat with China and the US, using GDP as a measure. And the idea was we have to simplify things. We needed to simplify European regulations. So this is an important point because there is a wider application beyond sustainability. It's just that this omnibus is leading to look at sustainability first. The view was 25% simplification to alleviate what was considered a regulatory burden, particularly on smaller companies. However, the European Commission's omnibus proposal of February the 26th went beyond that to reopen the CSRD, really, and other regulations, which was to make it simpler for Wave 1 mandatory reporting entities coming near the end of their work, but to make it a voluntary standard for many of the Wave 2 large entities who were probably closer to SMEs, but came into the scope of the CSRD just by growing. But really at the heart, you have a lot of smaller, private, medium-sized companies that became large. Now, the idea was still to make the CSRD a dominant design globally as a sustainability leadership standard for reporting, because it still had something special about it, which was the DMA. So, but there was a problem. It was a political decision that was taken somewhat as a knee-jerk reaction before the very first Wave 1 case studies were completed. While many companies were also still mid-Wave 2, it had been transposed into the law of 15 member states already, France being the first 2 years ago, Ireland last year, with another 9 member states in process. It's taken 5 years to make the CSRD and move it into law. And now the omnibus proposal is a fast-track response, which proposes to somewhat hit the big red button on the production line. While there are a lot of details on that slide, I will say the key message is, the bottom line is, a lot of companies now will almost certainly fall out of scope. So this is the purpose of the webinar today, which brings us on to part 2. And after all of that, I'm going to stop the clock on myself, draw a wee bit of breath, and invite contributions from our panel. Now, each one on the panel stands at a different corner flag, as I call it, on our sustainability field, and everyone has a particular view. Now, I'm going to pick on somebody first. I'm going to pick on yourself, Max. You incorporated CSRD into your curriculum at Trinity. So really, where do you think we are now, and how has this bump in the road impacted you in your work?
Yeah, many thanks, Johnny, for the warm introduction, and also a welcome from my side. So I'm happy to speak about that. So I have to say that kind of from our perspective at the business school, the CSRD was really a very welcome development because it brought a lot of interest on this topic into the business school. We definitely saw a big uptick in interest in our programs on the executive education level and also on the master's level on this issue. So I think that was an important step. But at the same time, obviously, I also kind of look at the omnibus development with kind of a bit of sadness, to be honest. I'm not totally surprised because we have already seen last year with the CSRD developments that there is not a lot of enthusiasm on the regulatory side to actually maintain high standards. And obviously, we have seen unprecedented political uncertainty over the past few years. And for me, I just want to take a small step back. If you just look at the past decade, Johnny, you outlined it before. It's just incredible what kind of sustainability agenda wave we have all gone through. I think it picked up momentum after the Paris Agreement. It seemed unstoppable by 2019, 2020. And then what came along, obviously, were three big shocks: the pandemic, the Ukraine war, and now most recently, the election of Donald Trump for a second term in the US. And that disrupted a lot of this enthusiasm that we have seen, an ESG hype, I would almost say, that has built up over the past few years. And now it seems to be deflating. And so I think one of my core messages here is, in times of unprecedented uncertainty, we all need to focus on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals have not changed in terms of sustainability. So the social and environmental challenges that we all need to address collectively have not changed a bit, if at all. They have actually worsened. So we cannot move away from these frameworks. And then one of the core fundamentals is just, if you look at any business, it is a value-creating institution, and it creates value for stakeholders. And it never was only financial value. So we need to balance those different interests that stakeholders have. And the CSRD is just kind of one piece in the puzzle that obviously is very important because it's a regulatory requirement, but it basically is a technical point. And that brings me to my second point that I want to make. And that is really about reporting on sustainability should not be an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And that's a conversation that in academia is quite consolidated by now, because obviously even before CSRD, there were a lot of voluntary reporting frameworks, and reporting on sustainability issues was not invented by the CSRD, rather it was codified by the CSRD. And in that way, I really think the point needs to be, we need to recognize the strategic value of the tools that the CSRD entails, like the materiality assessment, looking at the perspectives from stakeholders on your business, and then strategically really thinking about what meaning sustainability has for any business. But you can also take the compliance-oriented route and kind of only focus on the technicalities. And that's obviously what we see. People come to our courses also with the saying, now we have to do this report, and it's a lot of work, and it is a lot of work. Objectively, it's a mountain of work. And then you might not actually see the value behind it. But there is a big strategic value because sustainability is inevitable. Every company has touch points with it, some more, some less. But we can't discuss it away, and we can't wish it away. And if you want competitive advantage in the future, you need to focus on sustainability. And that's why I see this omnibus development as a point of reckoning for sustainability in business. Maybe we need less communication. We can simplify reporting frameworks, but we need to focus on action and diligently do the work to transform business models in the direction of more sustainability, because that's the only way to actually achieve better social and environmental outcomes of business. And that's the ultimate goal we all have. And I'm happy to stop here for this first part and hand over to Mark, who certainly will have very interesting thoughts on the business perspective, and also from his big background, strong experience in the UK and the Netherlands as well. So maybe you can share a few thoughts, Mark, on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Max. Hi, Johnny. Yeah, interesting. I take perhaps a more sanguine view of the omnibus than some others. There was a great outcry within the sustainability community. I call it gnashing of teeth and renting of garments. And I completely understand it, because, as Max said, it really was seeming to be unstoppable. The scope of the CSRD, 50,000 companies required to report, the depth of the data points, the need for assurance. It really was a revolution in corporate reporting. So I entirely understand the disappointment within the sustainability community that seems to be slipping away. However, it's not gone completely. I don't see it as stop the clock. I see it as slowing down the clock a little bit. I think realistically, and having seen it from the consulting side, in practical terms, it was too far too quickly, pushing too many companies that were not equipped to deal with it within that time frame to get there. So I'm not surprised that behind the scenes, I'm sure there were many companies giving full-throated support in public, and perhaps dispatching lobbyists behind the scenes to have chats with the European Commission about all this. So I'm not surprised. I don't see it as the end of the world. And I think what have we got? Well, we've got 10,000 of the biggest companies, most likely. If this goes through as being limited to companies of 1,000 employees or more, the estimates are that will then bring about 10,000 of the original 50,000 companies into scope. Now, the thing is, those companies are the biggest companies, they're the wealthiest companies, they are the most highly resourced companies, and they have the broadest shoulders in terms of being able to do this. And having seen it from, I was about to give a fossil fuel analogy of the coal face, which is probably not appropriate, but having seen it from that side of things, there is so much to do with CSRD, starting with the data. The huge amount of data points, and historically, most companies, even the largest, do not have highly sophisticated, well-integrated data systems for non-financial data. They have it for their financial data, for their corporate reporting. It's been there for years. Non-financial side, not so much. You may or may not be surprised at the number of companies that are cobbling together Excel spreadsheets with all the data issues that come with that. So that is moving, and CSRD was the trigger for that. So all the tech companies are in with the consultants developing new solutions, but they're not happening overnight. So I see some sense in saying, okay, let's have the biggest 10,000 companies that have the money and the resources to put into developing the data solutions, to figuring out how to do this, to upskilling their teams on how to do this, to changing the culture within their organizations for the cross-functional task of reporting. Let's bed this down within the companies that are most able to do it, best equipped to do it, and then that can then spread out. So we will see how that goes, but I think in that sense, it's perhaps a pragmatic proposal. I have seen, so one of the things I used to do in previous roles was a pretty regular survey of sustainability reporting every couple of years on a very large number of companies. And what we would see would be the pattern of the largest companies adopting a practice, and then that gradually being adopted by smaller companies until it becomes standard business practice across the whole of business. I suspect that will happen with this. I don't know. I hope it will happen with this. However, we'll come on to it. I think for some companies that may not be technically in scope, may not be among those 10,000, there will still be benefits. And there's a decision for them to make to say, okay, let's look at this and say, even if we are not mandated to do this, are there benefits for us still continuing on that path? So we'll come on to that, Johnny, but I think I'll stop there and say, look, I see it as pragmatic and hopefully not the end of the world.
Thanks very much, Mark. In fact, I should tell the audience as well about your article you published on LinkedIn. Is it over a month now that you published it? It made me sit up and notice, so I hope you can reshare it, or maybe we can point people towards it.
Sure, happy to do that.
Great. Liam, can you jump into the breach here and tell us about your conversations?
Yeah, no, and I suppose we're seeing it from kind of the small and medium-sized business. If you look at, typically we're working with organizations maybe under 1,000. We've been working on the CSRD. And actually, I was interested in Mark's point, because I completely understand the point around, the top 10,000. But I spoke to an insurance company recently that did a survey of all of Europe. And in Ireland, they were asked, do you care about sustainability? And consumer says yes. And they said, what should happen? And they said, well, the government should do something about it. And in Germany, the consumers said, yes, I care about it, and we should do something about it. So I think although from an impact perspective, those top 10,000 have a huge impact, ultimately the ability to take personal responsibility, both as individuals and smaller organizations, that's necessary at some point as well. And, having said that, I do think that CSRD, I was excited about it and the opportunity to really get into these sustainability projects, but I became a little bit disillusioned with it last year when I saw how overly onerous it was for the SMEs, and much more onerous proportionately than with many of the larger entities that had sustainability reporting, had, governances and structures, and the kind of additional effort for them associated with CSRD was so much less than these smaller and mid-sized entities that were spending hundreds of thousands of euro purely on transparency without any impact. It would have been much better for these organizations to spend their money on retrofitting, on migrating to renewable energy, and etc. So, however, CSRD ultimately, I think Max said this, it was built on the premise that stakeholders want to engage with sustainable organizations, and reporting would reward those that were making the necessary changes while identifying those that were the problem. So, without CSRD, it's not clear what will drive that change beyond those organizations. And the reality is we're making very slow progress. Again, like as Max said, we seem to have a lot of momentum behind us up until the pandemic, and it's just been problem after problem slowing us down. And we're probably further delaying meaningful action by sending this message now around CSRD, which I do agree was overly onerous. But the risks are increasing. Like if you look at the transition risk now, for the Irish government, it's approaching 2030. We know there's big fines potentially on the table. Everybody's been seeing that in the newspapers, fines numbers mentioned up to 26 billion. So I suppose the transition risk around a carbon tax being applied at a multiple of what's currently there. So it becomes hundreds of euros. Are the government going to need to do that in order to try and drive change in the industries? Are they going to do it to recoup some of the money? Equally, like the physical risks are increasing. We're seeing, more storms, more erosion, more flooding. And while that might not impact all businesses directly, it's certainly it will have an impact on what the government can spend its money on, and having to divert money from building a strong economy into flood relief, into disaster recovery, etc. So, my preference would have been for some sort of CSRD light. And obviously there is the voluntary SME reporting, which is aligned to CSRD, but to maintain some sort of focus on that really big issue around climate and environmental impact, and be able to reduce maybe the overhead associated would have been ideal for me. But I think overall, I can see CSRD as being overly onerous and penalizing smaller businesses and mid-sized businesses.
Thanks very much for that, Liam. We're a little bit out of sequence now, I suppose. Would you mind now? I might drop in to Aoife just to see if we're live again.
Testing 1, 2. I'm hoping.
Dead on. Great,
Yeah.
you're back. Great stuff. Thanks very much.
Apologies, Zoom decided to change my audio settings mid-webinar, so appreciate the patience. And hello, Gia Ditch, everyone. Johnny, thank you very much. I'm loving the nautical theme, particularly with DMV's background in the maritime sector. It's great to see.
Right.
And I know today we're really looking at where we're at right now and where we're going. So I suppose DMV, when it comes to CSRD, it was no real surprise that following the Omnibus, we were advising clients on their new course or their new direction. The initial calls that we received were to really reassure them, and predominantly on the wave 2 clients, and a shift really from focus from compliance to strategy for any of the wave 3. The first question I'm sure many of you either had or posed was, are we in, are we out, and by when? And we've been really honest and factual with our clients. We're having those conversations on what they need to do in terms of staying full steam ahead. Others are looking at, regardless of the Omnibus, can we take advantage of that extra breathing space? And I know some of your other panelists have alluded to that as well. One observation that I've definitely made in talking with clients is, irrespective of the Omnibus, the direction of travel really remains unchanged. Sustainability is the only destination on the map, and I'm staying with the nautical theme here, for any business that wants to be in business 20 years from now. So following the proposal, there was an understandable sense of disappointment, particularly among our clients and the sustainability leads within the companies. They felt penalized for being maybe the early adopters, putting their role on the line to really push CSRD in the boardrooms. So we had to take that view of engaging with them, bringing it back to strategy, and really asking the why. Yeah, there's definitely been tough conversations, but our clients have, over the last month, we've seen that they've begun to emerge from the noise and they're pivoting. We're seeing that right now. One consistency I've also noticed in terms of those conversations is the importance of maintaining momentum, and there's definitely a huge focus on decarbonisation and really achieving net zero. So client feedback during our calls, the intention behind CSRD was great, and even playing field for sustainability reporting, fantastic. But when it's different leagues trying to play ball at the same time, you can see how chaos can ensue. So it was particularly challenging, I would say, more for the smaller companies. I know, Mark, you mentioned that, and how do they comply with all the different data points? And again, looking at maybe the resources that they just don't have in terms of the knowledge gap and people on the ground. So looking at that and trying to help them get their heads around it, where we are, where we're going. Now what we're looking for within the different waves is mapping a road ahead. So for wave 1, clients, the horses have bolted, they're publishing their CSRD aligned reports as planned. Wave 2, and the majority, they're sticking to the pre-Omnibus plan. And then wave 3, we're seeing that pivoting. They're taking advantage of the additional time, and some are going down that voluntary SME route, which I can speak to a little bit more later. Just in terms of the energy transition, our own CEO, Ditlev Engel, he said, we have the tools, but what we're missing is implementation. And this is the message that we're sending to clients, regardless of the Omnibus. There is no pause in progress. So on that note, I'll hand it back to you, Johnny. I know I've kind of mixed up your plan and how things are going to flow, but I'm hoping that resonates in terms of what's happening at DMV and what the wider audience might be seeing.
Thanks very much, Aoife. That's great. And I might now flash up the slide for the third part, actually, because it's the most interesting thing about, I think, our discussion today. A bit of a free-for-all. So, we'll see what happens. But I might, my original intention was to use Liam as a bridge from where we are to where we're going. And I might jump back to you, Liam, just to kick it off so that everybody then can jump in after you. And I might just pose something for you, because you were talking about your own viewpoint there and your own experience over the last couple of years working with clients, what you've been hearing, what you've been seeing and the advice you've been giving. Now, as a wave 2 medium to large size private company who may have gone through a rapid expansion, and this term growing into scope of CSRD, they're never going to breach the 1,000 employee threshold. They're halfway through their DMA. They've invested lots of time and effort. What's your advice to them? What do they do now? What's the pivot?
Yeah, and obviously wave 2, for those who don't know, would have been reporting on 2025 year-end data in 2026. So they would be in the middle of their project now, typically. And it's it's the challenges for those companies between 200 and 1,000 staff, really, who have now, assuming stop the clock happens and content directives happens, will now not have a mandatory reporting requirement in the near future. So obviously, companies have the option of just stopping, saving money, and maybe in the short term that might be an attractive option. For me, organizations have an obligation to shareholders to assess the impact of sustainability issues on their businesses and plan accordingly. Like the double materiality assessment, which I think many of us have spoken about, is a really valuable and robust process. I think the evidence necessary to achieve the audit assurance level necessary may have been not necessary or maybe overkill now, but the actual process of going through the DMA was really insightful to identify those impacts, risks, and opportunities, and it adds value. And it just seems to be a necessary thing to do for a business that acknowledges climate change is real. And if you don't think it's real, you're probably on the wrong webinar. Like we know it's happening, we know it's going to impact us significantly. If we identify impacts and risks and opportunities, we'll be able to build actions into the business strategy to reflect these. So first up, I would highly recommend conducting the value chain and DMA. It's like any other external impact. If you know a pandemic is coming, or a global security shakeup is coming, or a global trade war is coming, it would be remiss of you not to plan for that. And equally, we know that we're going to feel the impacts of climate change, and we're a bit late to the game. And so to not plan around that is just silly. It's just not doing your job. And I think once organizations do the DMA and do the value chain, it will drive certain actions which may go into a sustainability strategy or may go into the business strategy, but I don't think it's going to be contentious to deliver on those actions, because the process of going through this, you're identifying things that are actually going to add value to the business. For me, I suppose the more question of where there is decisions are around what you do with regard to voluntary reporting. There is the voluntary SME standard, which I mentioned, which is aligned to CSRD, and it's the most obvious standard. I think probably does make sense, though, to understand what's driving reporting now. Like certainly if you are dealing with financial services and you have debt and equity requirements, that might drive a standard. If you have shareholders who want to understand that you're managing the risks, the impacts, the opportunities, that might drive reporting. And certainly if you're planning to exit your business in the next 5 years, and now most businesses we deal with, when we're helping them be sold, they're doing sustainability due diligence as well as financial due diligence. So I think there are a lot of drivers why voluntary reporting still makes a lot of sense for organizations, but I'm not as confident as I am with the DMA and the value chain that it's absolutely a must-have for all businesses. And in fact, I'd welcome the views of the rest of the panel on that and what the triggers would be for them as to, when you should report now on a voluntary basis, as opposed to just get your head down and actually prepare your business for what's coming.
Thanks, Liam. Yeah, let's throw it open to the floor. Who would like to respond?
Yeah, Johnny, I'd fully agree with that. I think where to move now, the first thing I would say is be proactive and decide. There's uncertainty going on. We don't know how long this omnibus proposal is going to take to get through the Parliament, what changes to the proposals are going to be made, when it's finally going to happen, when it's finally going to go into national laws, all unknown. So the first thing is don't sit on your hands in the meantime. Make a decision, have a reporting strategy, decide what that is, know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and move ahead with that. I would say that that's the first thing. Don't get caught in inertia. The second thing, picking up on Liam's point, is that for those companies that are no longer required to align with CSRD and ESRS as mandatory requirements, to think about the benefits that come from that, from the process, including the DMA. And I'd like to point out three of those, which pick up in part on Liam's points. The first is, and also what Max was saying earlier about reporting is not the end in itself. So the whole process of identifying impacts, risks, and opportunities is a sustainability strategy and a business strategy tool. It's not about just putting those IROs into a report and sending it out to the world. It's what are you going to do about those IROs? What you've figured out which ones are material and important. So what are you going to do about addressing those impacts, managing those risks, unlocking those opportunities? Whether you choose to report that or not, having that clarity in your strategy is going to be useful to your business. So adopting the process, irrespective of whether you report or not, has benefits. Secondly, from that, I think the IRO structure is what is helping to further blur that boundary between non-financial and financial. So TCFD started off the concept of financial risks and opportunities specific to climate, and then CSRD picked that up across the whole spectrum of ESG. And so Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg and the others were the ones saying, let's stop thinking about this as non-financial. It is very definitely financial. And those people that say the I's are not financial, well, most of those impacts are related to a risk or potentially an opportunity. So I would say that the value of doing that is to maintain that integration or the dissolving of the boundary between financial and non-financial, and continuing to develop sustainability as a financial issue, which is really where you need to go if you're going to really make this part of business. So I'd say stick with that. And then thirdly, picking up on the point before, with IROs, you have to collect the data on IROs in order to monitor them, assess their materiality going forwards, assess which risks you should be mitigating and managing, which impacts you should be addressing. You need the data. And as I was alluding to before, the tech and data solutions out there are just developing. What I was seeing, I know these things are moving very quickly, so please correct me if I'm wrong or behind the times. But what I was seeing was some tech solutions to automate DMA, some very topic-specific tech and data solutions around carbon or circular or what have you. But all the organizations saying, well, how do we get all the data for all these data points, bring it together so it's reliable, and integrate that into our corporate reporting systems? You're still going to need to do that in one form or another. The amount of data points might change, but they're still going to be there. So I think CSRD ESRS was a very useful tool to catalyze that tech and data progression. And I don't think you should let go of that, because you're still going to need it in one form or another. So I'll stop there.
Hey, Johnny, can I just kind of build on that? Because if you think about it, we're all saying, look, value chain and DMA just makes business sense. But then building on Mark's point, you're going to, at the end of that, you're going to identify, well, there's probably some data points missing, even just to manage those IROs and to help you develop the strategy. So you're going to have to find those data points. But then you're into, well, now the incremental uplift to do a report is starting to reduce, right? Because you actually know what your DMA is. you know where your data is, you're starting to improve the quality of your data. And so now the next step is just to report. So, you know, maybe it comes back actually to the point Mark made about too much too quickly at the very beginning. And maybe by stealth, we'll get to the same result for many organizations, but in a little bit more of a controlled manner and hopefully a more supported manner.
Very good, Liam. And I'll invite again, Aoife, Max, if you want to jump in here, give your own viewpoint on where we're going.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to pick up on Liam and Mark's conversation there, and just bring in the point about kind of what is the value of doing reporting if you're not legally required to. And I think one important thing that we know from research is that there is a performative aspect of sustainability reporting. So if you don't talk about what you do, you cannot affect change either in your organization. So there is value in obviously applying those strategic tools, and there is huge strategic value for any company. But obviously some companies might not be incentivized by their shareholders to do this, or by their customers to do this, because they might be business to business operations, and then the core business clients they have might not ask them for additional information. But even in that situation, you can prepare yourself that these questions will come up more, and that's actually a trickle-down effect that we have seen already from the CSRD that brought SMEs to this topic, because, oh, I'm now asked all these questions, and I don't have the reporting systems in place, I don't have the data. And so I think you need reporting and applying these tools if you want to maintain a sustainable business operation. And if you want to actually improve on some of the issues that you have identified, you need data to drive change. Otherwise, you will not be able to do it. And you cannot start kind of a change process in a company without talking about it and then regularly talking about it. And so that also brings up, okay, you need to do this not only once, but then again, and report on the progress and the challenges. And obviously a lot of this can be internal, but there is value in this exercise. But I think the precondition is intent. So you actually need to want to do it. Obviously, if you're not interested in sustainability, you don't feel that any stakeholder in your business network asks for it, then your report is a tick box exercise. You do it just for compliance reasons, and it doesn't affect change. And we know this also from a lot of research. Having reporting requirements doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes. Sometimes it really does. You create a report, and you might even outsource that process to a significant degree, and then you just go on and try not to change anything. But that's not the conversation that we are in here. So that's just a point I wanted to bring in. And maybe, Aoife, if you have, I might just hand to you.
Thank you. Certainly everything that everyone mentions is resonating. I can give an example from an SME that we've been working with over the last couple of weeks, and they have decided to go down the voluntary road, and they're going with the voluntary SME standard. For them, they confirmed that it would provide them with that competitive advantage that you mentioned. It would keep them ahead of the compliance curve during this uncertainty, but it also signals to internal and external stakeholders that they are fully committed to sustainability. You know, as a sustainability consultant, I've observed this particular company's dedication, and they're really going to stay on course despite all the challenges that we've mentioned so far. They decided not to reverse their decision because they recognize the opportunities beyond reporting. And back to your point earlier, Johnny, they're really trying to anchor sustainability within the company. This client, they pointed out to us last week, I think it was on a call, that regardless of the Omnibus, the climate action plan, net zero targets, B Corp, customer demands, triple planetary crisis, they're not going away, and there's no stop the clock. So for this client, we're now working on them. We're closing the gaps, we're identifying accelerator decarbonization projects, and we're really enhancing that stakeholder engagement piece. We've gone through the double materiality assessment, and we've advised them to proceed with the comprehensive module within the voluntary SME standard because they've put in all the work, they have all the data, it just makes sense. Yeah, back to CSRD, it definitely influenced their sustainability journey, but ultimately after going through the DMA, They've now chosen the voluntary SME standard because, again, it emphasises their commitment to sustainability, particularly to their customers and competitors. And again, the main takeaway for myself working on this project with this clients would, although there's many, many uncertainties, geopolitical, you name it, from the environment side of the house, having a sustainability plan and sticking to it makes a good business case. There's just no stop the clock. And I'll hand it back to anybody that wants to jump in there.
I might jump in actually, as I was supposed to be moderating, but it wouldn't be a conversation unless Johnny gave his point of view as well. Thanks very much, Eve, and everybody before that. Yes, I mean, the one thing I'd say is that I've had conversations with CFOs who thought that would happen over the past couple of years, really leading sustainability from the front in organizations. And I try to put myself in their shoes and think, what must it be like, in a sense, to be put in this uncomfortable place where it's outside what you studied, what you do. You have to master an entirely different field and language in meetings. What are all these terms? It's as if another form of accounting or financial reporting had been invented right before their eyes. And some of the takeaways I was kind of jotting down was that this aspect of compliance that you mentioned there, Aoife, in the Irish context, is that when we say we're doing CSRD because of compliance, well, compliance is a very much bigger thing because, as you said, there's no going back and there's a number of regulations on the way. Let's take, for example, nature restoration, Green Claims Directive, product labelling, forced labour in supply chains, in addition to what had been under the CSRD, circular economy and so on. And it seems like the EU, despite this simplification move, are going to wield the polluter pays principle. And if we think about Ireland, if you mentioned the Climate Action Plan, well, that's backed in the law. So of all of the regions you would say that came within the CSRD being transposed into member state law, you would say, well, in Ireland, it's copper fastened by the fact that you have this EU system, you have the Irish system, you have local compliance, and as Liam mentioned earlier, the country or the government or the taxpayer is on the hook for 26 billion exposure and costs. Now, I would say, given the performance gap of how we're not close to being halfway to net zero, and the EPA produced their State of the Environment report, which is brilliant, and everyone should check it out, showing how poor our performance is. Well, we have to catch up on 10 years of inaction in the next 5 years. We have to double down or treble down on everything, or else there'll be some form of cost recovery by government. Now, whether that's going to be through penalties, through increases in carbon taxes, we don't know. But one thing is for sure, there'll be more sticks than there will be carrots. And because it's in the law, the courts of the land will play an outsized role, because there are a number of cases coming before the courts where citizens who have jurisdiction under the law are taking businesses and governments to account. And I'd also say that this is a moment of, I would say, imperfect information. There are high stakes risks on sustainability, which everybody has mentioned so far. And in an era of massive unpredictability about what's going to happen, it's very important, I'm speaking to CFOs now more directly, drop an anchor of certainty, to continue the maritime theme there, Aoife. So the CSRD and its surrounding ecosystem, it's hardwired already into the EU's approach to sustainability in the Green Deal. The only way, as Aoife said, is forward. The Omnibus simplification is meant to reduce the burden, making it easier to increase the take-up. I saw an excellent slide on a different webinar on Monday with 30 or so different options around the world, reporting frameworks, standards, marks, and so on, but none of them are backed in the same way by the EU. So what I would say is be on the inside rather than on the outside doing your own thing, or trying to map across using a complex interoperability index. And as has been mentioned already, DMAs really are different, and IROs are extremely useful, as Mark said, for your risk register. So use the DMA as your pivot for strategy, identify those areas of high materiality, and sure, if you're going to pick 3 projects, you can have one for each of the emergencies on climate, biodiversity, and pollution. The projects will make the impact, which will produce the data, which will make the report. So use Project Drawdown as well, which is a range of different solutions, some of which Liam covered, and embrace simplification. Leverage that VSME standard that's been mentioned, produced by EFRAG, and leverage too the streamlining standard for finance for SMEs under the Green Deal. You can draw down the funding under the Green Deal model to support strategy and projects. I leave you, because we're coming near the end now, I'm going to ask for the maritime slide to appear because so much work went into it. It looks, thank you very much, marketing, for putting effort into that, because we've used terms like compass points. We've talked about the anchor of certainty. And I want to mention as well to CFOs, in a recent Kearney report called Staying the Course for the Green Transition, 93% of CFOs see a clear business case for investing in sustainability, and 69% of CFOs expect a higher ROI from sustainability initiatives compared with conventional investments. So we're near the end. I am going to just ask if anybody has anything final to say before we wrap up. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So we're going to finish on time. That concludes our 1 hour, which contained an awful lot of information. So we're going to follow up with an article, some of the FAQs that came in, I'm sure, during the chat, which we didn't get a chance to speak to. I'm going to thank the panel. So Max, Mark, Aoife and Liam, and thank behind the scenes, Fina, Kiva and Brendan. Thank you all in our audience for attending. We're going to share the video, the FAQs, and add your comments and repost, please, on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. That's all I have for you today, I'm afraid. And thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Johnny. Bye-bye.